Welcome, curious listeners. We're doing a deep dive today into some pretty unsettling corners of childhood memory. We're not just, recalling old stories. We're really looking at specific moments, characters, even stuff that seemed innocent that just etched itself into young minds, things that linger as sources of unease, maybe fear, sometimes even this like strange fascination. So our mission today is to unpack these experiences, try to understand the sheer power, really, of these early encounters with the terrifying and the uncanny.
Absolutely. And what's really compelling here, I think, is how these seemingly separate bits of media actually connect. They often reveal common psychological triggers, and they show us how early exposure to certain themes can, profoundly shape how we perceive fear for years, maybe even decades. It's definitely more than just a quick scare.
Right, exactly. So let's get into it. Let's start with a classic, almost primal fear, you could say.
Okay.
Dolls. It's that deep unease, isn't it? When something that's meant to be comforting suddenly feels, wrong. We heard from one person about the slime monster from that 90s Ghost Rider show. A creature apparently so unsettling it was almost like completely repressed from memory.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about that specific slime monster example is how its impact was apparently amplified. For this particular person, it hit so hard because it tapped into an earlier, maybe even more profound scarring experience. Chucky. So the slime monster wasn't just scary on its own, it was sort of like a re-traumatization hitting an already established fear button.
Wow. Okay, so imagine being a kid, right? Growing up in a house, and there are these antique, kind of creepy Japanese dolls in glass cases, just silent, staring, and you have that nightly walk to the bathroom past these figures. It already sets a stage of unease, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So this personal backdrop, this sort of real-world uncanny valley situation, it really sets the scene for the horror that then arrived with Child's Play.
It's such a profound subversion of innocence, isn't it? When the most, benign object, a child's toy, is turned into a weapon, and for a child watching the film's scenario, this doll that looks innocent but is possessed by a serial killer, it's terrifying. Because it shatters not just the safety of the toy itself, but maybe the perceived safety of their whole world.
Exactly. And the really terrifying twist, the thing that gets you, is that the adults, your usual protectors, they're completely helpless against this little doll. Chucky doesn't just scare you. He violates that fundamental sense of security every kid relies on. That betrayal of trust, of the fact your guardians can't protect you from something so small and seemingly familiar, that creates a really unique, lasting kind of anxiety.
It definitely raises an important question about, the vulnerability of childhood itself.
Yeah.
When that supposed safe haven of a toy and also the authority of adults are just so thoroughly shattered, it creates a very specific kind of terror. It's incredibly hard to shake. It's a deep fear, almost existential, of betrayal coming from inside your own sanctuary.
And yet, surprisingly, for some people, even the later Child's Play films, the ones often called cult classics, or maybe even genre schlock, like Seed of Chucky and Bride of Chucky, the ones that gave Chucky this bizarre family life. Paradoxically, they actually helped some people desensitize that original, really visceral fear.
Yeah, that's an interesting psychological phenomenon, actually. By bringing in more absurdity, more overt comedy, those sequels, at least for some viewers, kind of reframed Chucky. He went from being this purely existential threat to something more like a digestible pop culture icon. The horror gets diluted, almost kind of endearing in how ridiculous it is. It allows a shift from pure terror to this strange sort of familiarity, maybe even morbid amusement. It shows how our relationship with fear can change over time.
Okay, so from the unsettling world of dolls, let's move to a cartoon. One that, for a lot of people, was a really unexpected gateway into horror. Courage the Cowardly Dog. This show, it had heartwarming moments, but it absolutely did not shy away from true terror. The premise itself is kind of eerie, right? Courage, this abandoned pup who's terrified of everything, lives with old Muriel and Eustace in a house literally in the middle of nowhere. And this place just seems cursed, like it attracts every single supernatural thing imaginable.
And that isolation, the setting, combined with the constant, just relentless threat, it creates this atmosphere of pervasive dread. It's not just about individual scares, it's about the slow erosion of safety. And it forces a character like Courage, who's so vulnerable, to constantly face his deepest fears. That's really effective psychological horror, especially for kids. Oh, absolutely. And then you have the moments themselves. That chilling return the slab sequence. I think that's permanently burned into a lot of brains. But beyond that, the sudden, really drastic shifts in animation style, combined with jump scares, it created this profound sense of things just being wrong. And remember that crazy lady character? Someone mentioned she was unsettlingly like strict nuns they remembered.
That visual dissonance is key, I think. It really subverts your expectations. It pulls you out of the comfort zone of typical animation and throws you into this jarring, unsettling reality. It's like a violation of the medium itself, which makes the scary stuff hit even harder. And yeah, those subtle character designs often tap into anxieties we already have, like, the archetypal strict authority figure. Exactly. And the psychological torment that you have perfect dream sequence. Someone described it as Black Swan level torment. Right out of Cartoon Network.
Yeah.
It's not about some monster outside. It's the insidious terror of your own inadequacy. That's deeply unsettling. But wait, there's more. The show had Muriel's really freaky nephew with a shaving fetish, and that unforgettable ending where Muriel and Eustace are turned into puppets. It heavily implies Courage is now living among corpses, basically.
Yeah.
Like he's pulling their strings, trying to keep up this sad fantasy that they're still alive. It's just profoundly tragic and disturbing.
What's really remarkable is how sophisticated the show was in weaving in horror elements. If you were a horror fan paying attention, it was packed with references. There was a whole episode parodying The Exorcist, complete with head spins, demonic voices, a director character who was a zombie serial killer named Benton Tarantella, nods to Hunchback of Notre Dame, classic alien movies, even King Ghidorah from Godzilla. It wasn't just scary, it was genuinely a masterclass in putting real, sometimes existential horror into a kids' show format.
Now, here's one you might not expect in a discussion about childhood trauma. Samurai Jack. It's known for its amazing art, its action, its serious tone. Generally not something you'd connect with horror. Yet there's this one particular episode that stands out as a genuine exception.
And that's probably why it's so potent, right? Because it deviates so much from the show's usual style. Jack in the Haunted House, episode 9 of season 3.
Yeah.
It becomes this masterclass in psychological horror precisely because it's so unexpected within that show.
Yeah. It starts with Jack walking through a dark forest at night. He finds this little girl crying, alone. She gets startled, runs off, drops a stuffed animal, which leads Jack to this old, seemingly abandoned house. And from the moment he goes inside, it's just this slow burn of unease.
What's fascinating is how deliberately it shifts the show's usual energetic style. There's hardly any background music. Instead, there's this heavy emphasis on sound effects, Jack's footsteps, creaks, ambient night sounds. Every little detail works to build this increasingly unsettling, oppressive atmosphere. It builds tension through suggestion, not just jump scares.
So Jack goes in, he thinks he sees people inside, but then the house is completely empty. He looks around, can't find anything, and then he realizes he's trapped. All the windows and doors just disappear, vanish. He eventually finds one room that's totally different, clean, bright, full of life. The little girl and her family are there having tea. Jack starts thinking maybe he's losing it, but the father reassures him, says everything's fine, and then moments later, this horrifying transformation happens. Just bang.
That episode uses really subtle psychological techniques, things that even some feature-length horror films don't quite manage. It's the slow erosion of Jack's reality, the way his own perceptions are almost gaslit, and then that final, visceral betrayal, something appearing safe and then suddenly turning horrific. That leaves such a lasting impression, especially you imagine on a younger viewer watching alone at night. It's a brilliant example of how atmosphere and messing with your head can be way more terrifying than just showing a monster.
Okay, we've talked about some really deep-seated stuff.
Yeah.
But not every scare has to be, profoundly traumatic to be memorable, right? Let's shift gears a bit. Let's do a quick round of those uniquely unsettling childhood curiosities that maybe not traumatizing, but definitely left a mark. First up, Mr. Meaty. Maybe not terrifying overall, but those creepy puppets, definitely uncomfortable viewing.
Oh yeah, that's the uncanny valley effect again, right? Where something looks almost human, but not quite right. It can be deeply unsettling. Mr. Meaty's puppets probably tapped right into that.
And there was one specific episode with a tapeworm, which is literally fished out of a character and then sold to a customer to take to a zoo, carried away by hand. That definitely qualifies as uniquely disturbing, just the sheer gross out factor, plus the absolute bizarre idea of selling a living parasite. It's just wrong on so many levels. Okay, next. Are you afraid of the dark? For a lot of people, the show itself wasn't always the absolute scariest thing, but that iconic intro sequence, especially if you watch it late at night, total nightmare fuel. And there was one specific episode people mentioned, featuring some kind of creature in a swimming pool. That seems to stand out as particularly creepy too.
It raises an interesting question, doesn't it? What is it about these intros, or sometimes just single moments or episodes, that imprint so deeply? Even when the rest of the show isn't quite as impactful, it really highlights the power of a concentrated dose of unease. Like a quick flash of disturbing imagery or sound that just hits a particular nerve. It's horror being efficient, in a way.
Then there's Tales from the Crypt. Again, the stories weren't always like traumatizing for everyone. But that intro, catchy theme tune, yeah. But incredibly unsettling visuals, ending with what one source vividly called a maniacally laughing meth head Skeletor jump scare. Definitely too much for young eyes. And people remember Santa episodes too, one about cannibalism, another with a ventriloquist dummy that was just deeply wrong. The sheer discomfort of those visuals, deliberately designed to be unsettling, really dug in deep for some kids. And finally, a really unique one that some of you listening might relate to, the I Spy books. For some people, these books, visually amazing, right? Intricately built little sets, but they had this uncanny, almost alien quality. Despite being beautiful, there's always something subtly off, vaguely unnatural, like they were trying too perfectly to replicate reality and just falling short somehow. And of course, they had the explicitly spooky editions, which definitely didn't help matters.
That's a fascinating point about the I Spy books. It really speaks to how even subtle visual anomalies can trigger that uncanny valley response, where something is almost right but just off enough to make you feel uneasy. It shows how our brains are constantly trying to square what we see with what we expect, and when that expectation is just subtly betrayed, yeah, it can be deeply unsettling.
Okay, we've saved some of the most profoundly impactful experiences for last. We're delving into a world of horror that really pushed boundaries, especially for young audiences in a very specific cultural context. So in the early 2000s in the Philippines, there was this series of books that became insanely popular. True Philippine ghost story books.
And what's crucial here, I think, is the sheer lack of censorship. These books were widely available, aimed at children and teens, but they contain stories about paranormal experiences, actual ghost photography, and incredibly graphic content for that audience. We're talking stories about the spirits of aborted babies, rape victims, soldiers, even illustrations, apparently, of things like brain splattering on pavement. Really intense stuff.
Yeah, the direct exposure to that kind of visceral horror at a young age, it undoubtedly had a unique and intense impact. Very different from Western kids media, which usually has much stricter content rules. This wasn't just, spooky ghost stories. It was raw, often brutal.
And that kind of unfiltered exposure, especially when young minds are still figuring out the world, it can lead to a very different relationship with fear. Maybe one that's more deeply ingrained, less abstract, than the kind fostered by more, let's say, controlled or sanitized media.
These books got so popular they even led to a TV show called Don't Blink, a horror anthology based on them, and another similar series called Haunted Philippines. So adding visuals to stories that were already traumatizing, that just amplified the fear and paranoia. But even that wasn't the peak, apparently. The true peak of childhood terror for the person sharing this account came in 2002 with the American horror film The Ring.
The Ring. That film tapped into something truly primal, didn't it? It wasn't just about a monster, it was the whole concept of a cursed object, this creeping inevitability, and that deeply unsettling figure, Samara. It felt like a breach of reality itself.
To this day, the cursed video sequence itself remains unwatchable for the person who shared this. They described it as causing mental anguish, something beyond just simple childhood trauma. The disturbing images, those bone-chilling sound effects, and, the terrifying figure of Samara crawling out of the TV. It left an indelible mark. Strangely mixed, they said, with this odd sense of exhilaration too, which then led them to watch the original Japanese version, Ringu, further traumatizing themselves, even though their parents warned them not to.
That really highlights how certain films, especially those that tap into deep-seated, maybe ancient fears, and present them in such a visually and auditorily jarring way, they can move beyond childhood trauma. They can create a more enduring form of mental anguish that truly sticks with a person. It's the difference between a nightmare you wake up from and this persistent shadow that stays at the edge of your mind.
And then, just when you thought it was safe. 2004 brought The Grudge, described by this person as the ring on crack. This film presented a more disjointed, bloody, crawling figure with that equally disturbing sound, that clicking, gurgling noise. And watching the original Japanese Ju-on only compounded the fear, which just proves, I guess, that sometimes you simply don't learn from past trauma, do you?
It's a testament to the power of those specific Asian horror tropes, isn't it? The disjointed movements, the awful sounds, the whole idea of this all-consuming, vengeful spirit that literally follows you home. It's a complete violation of personal space, the sanctity of your home. It resonates with that universal fear of something malevolent crossing over into our reality.
And just as a final, slightly off-kilter note that really shows how deeply some fears can embed themselves, even today, apparently, the Cookie Monster can still be a source of genuine terror for some.
That's fascinating, really. It just shows that fear, once it's imprinted, can sometimes attach itself to the most unexpected, seemingly harmless things. It's a powerful reminder of how unique and sometimes unpredictable our psychological responses to those early exposures can be.
Wow, what a journey we've taken through some really dark corners of childhood media and the lasting impact it can have. It's clear that for many people, these early encounters with fear weren't just fleeting scares, they were profoundly impactful experiences, things that really shaped their understanding of horror, and maybe even their sensitivities as adults.
Absolutely. Which raises an important question for you, the listener, to think about. What is it that makes these specific images or stories so potent? Why do they embed themselves so deeply into our minds, sometimes for a lifetime? And how might these early exposures continue to influence the kind of horror that truly resonates with us, or maybe even repels us as adults? Something to mull over.
Definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the unexpected and often lasting terrors of childhood. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.